be a fly on the wall to be able to hear what was going on in breakout rooms. And I'm wondering if it's okay, I'd love to call on just a couple people, if you wouldn't mind sharing what your original sentence was that you came up with, and then what was the replacement sentence. So maybe Marianne, I'll pick on you first. What was your original sentence that you came up with?
Oh yeah. So we talked anyway. So my original sentence was, "The truth will set you free."
Okay.
My remake was, "The Holy Spirit will set you free."
Oh, interesting. So your replacement word for truth is the Holy Spirit.
It was.
Wow.
It is.
Okay, Lois, what was your original sentence? Do you mind unmuting? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure. No, the line from the song Brandy, because it sticks in my head from when I was a kid. He always told the truth. And then I said he always told how it really is.
He always told how it really is. Yeah. So it's like truth, reality. Interesting. Edward, would you tell us your sentence? Do you mind unmuting for a second? Let me see. I got you mute still. There you go.
The truth.
I'm sorry?
Am I clear? Did I come through?
Say the sentence one more time.
President Trump does not speak the truth.
Okay, so what did you replace it with?
President Trump does not speak the reality.
Okay, interesting. So again, the reality of what's going on. Great. Michelle, what'd you have? I'm so delighted to see you again.
You too. Well, I'll go with our second sentence, which was, "I'm here with my husband, Phil." And
Oh, okay.
he put our boys to be true to themselves.
Ah, okay.
I think for that one, we actually used, like, don't compromise yourself. To be true, you don't compromise.
Yeah, kind of like this integrity, or like, yeah, compromise. Yeah, be true to yourself. It's fascinating because these words, they're so similar, but there's also like a little bit of difference or nuance to them. And I think that's the reason why I wanted to do this, is I think it illumines a bit about what makes conversations around truth itself so hard, is that when we're talking about truth is truth is sort of an umbrella word that's capturing a number of different things all at the same time. So when we're thinking about what does it mean then to do truth or to practice truth, part of it's going to have to do with, like, what does it mean to practice reality? But part of it's going to do with, what does it mean to practice integrity? Or when I'm thinking about like the Trump statement, what does it mean to do to practice honesty? Like our faith, we use the word in a variety of different ways, and our faith tradition has something to say to each of these different ways that we're talking about truth. So what I would like to do is to highlight four ways I would say, maybe between 3 and 4 ways that we use truth in everyday speech, and then what might our faith tradition have to illuminate what doing truth or living truth in that way might have to say to us. So the first way that we're going to talk about it, and then after we do the first way, maybe we'll take another stand up and like a stretch break. But the very first way that we talk about truth, and is the way that I would say is the most classical way in which we would hear it. If we looked up the word in the dictionary, it would actually have a definition that's based on something that Aquinas said way back in the Middle Ages. Veritas et adequatio rea et intellectus. And actually his definition was based on something Aristotle said. What do we translate this into English? Truth is the adequation of thing and intellect. And you're probably in your own head thinking right now, yeah, that did not clarify the matter at all for me. So what is Aquinas talking about here? What Aquinas is basically saying is that truth is having a mind, the picture of the world that you've got in your mind is aligned with what actually exists in reality. So in the Western worldview, at least, in Western Christianity, what we would say is that the world exists separate than ourselves. So there is a world out there that is separate than what my mind is in itself. it's something that exists on its own, whether I believe in it or not. So what we would say, what Aquinas was hitting at was either the climate is warming or it is not warming, but you believing it does not make it true. So what exists is separate than what is in your mind. Either God exists or God does not exist, but God's existence is not dependent on whether you believe that God exists or not. What we would say, though, is that having your beliefs aligned with what is real in the world, that matters a whole lot. Because let's just say I don't believe in gravity. If I walk out the 4th story off my balcony, I'm going to hit the ground just as fast as somebody who does believe in gravity, because gravity doesn't care whether I believe in it or not for gravity to be able to exist. So if my mind is not aligned with what really is in the world, we're going to run into all sorts of problems. There's a famous story, probably of urban legend, but I think it captures Aquinas's intuition on this matter really, really well, which is the story of an encounter that happens between the US Navy and the Atlantic Ocean and the Canadian officials. And the way that it goes, the story is that the Canadians, the US military begins a conversation with the Canadians. Please divert your course 10 degrees to the north in order to avoid a collision. And the Canadians reply back, we recommend you divert your course 10 degrees to the north in order to avoid a collision. And then the Americans say, this is the captain of a USS Navy ship. I again say 10 degrees to the north, must divert your course. Canadian reply, no, divert your course 10 degrees to the north. This is going nowhere. The Americans, this is the aircraft carrier, the USS Missouri. We are the 2nd largest ship in the Atlantic fleet. There are 3 destroyers with us and 2 cruisers and numerous support vessels. We demand you divert your course 10 degrees to the north. That's 10 degrees to the north, or countermeasures will be taken to ensure the safety of these vessels. Canadians, this is a lighthouse, your call. So what we would say is that reality is what it is. It is, no matter who we are or how powerful we like to think of ourselves being, we are in danger of a terrible crash if our mind is not aligned with what is. And so sometimes in theology language, you'll see it described as that truth is objective. What do I mean when I say that truth is objective? The first way that I mean that, and the first way the Christian tradition means that, is that reality is what it is. You can wish it was otherwise, but reality is what it is. But there's a second thing that we mean by this also within Christian tradition that I'm going to say is equally important. And that's the sense that when I say truth is objective, it means that truth always remains ahead of me. Now, when I'm making a syllabus for the new semester at the school where I teach, what I do on the front page of the syllabus is I list my course objectives. And when I'm saying like an objective here, it means this is what I'm shooting for. This is what I'm striving for. So when I say that truth is objective, what that means is we also recognize reality is what it is, but reality is also way, way bigger than anything that I have been able to comprehend in my lifetime. So one of my friends who's a Dominican, he says, reality is like a bazillion volts of electricity. Most of us are working with 60-watt bulbs in our brain. And even if you happen to get a 100-watt bulb in your brain, in the big, huge scheme of things, the difference is not all that much. So what we would say is that while reality exists on its own, we are only able to perceive a fraction of what reality is. We have to be humble about this, because as much as I know about corn or a star or another person or God is so small in comparison to what could be known about a kernel of corn or a star or another person or God, that you could almost say that my picture that I have in my brain is less adequate than it is adequate, than it fully has mastered any one of these topics. So a way of saying this from Catholic theology is, Aquinas would say there's no such thing as alternative fact. We can, however, acknowledge that there's almost always going to be such thing as additional fact. We could always learn more about a topic than what we know right now. So I can't say that I possess truth or that I've got truth mastered. What does that require from us then? If we want to do truth in the way that we've been talking about it here, what the tradition demands of us is that we be consummate seekers of truth. So the first rule of doing truth is seek truth. What does that mean? I got to be open to learning. I got to respect that there's probably more information out there, and I'd be willing to change my mind if I actually got more information on a topic and it turns out that what I thought earlier was a less adequate picture of reality than it could have been. I particularly want to be in respect of the sciences. So sciences meaning kind of that rigorous, systematic pursuit of truth in community with other people who are all trying to seek information, facts about the natural world as it exists. Within the Catholic tradition, we would say that we have nothing to fear from any of the sciences, physical or metaphysics, because all truth in the end is going to be one. And even if right now it looks like it's contradicting each other, it simply means that there's more information that we've got to come to, because in the end, we're all pursuing one truth. And the way that we're going to do that, given the diversity of people on this planet, is to recognize all of us, no matter where it is that we come from in the world, whatever language we speak, whatever our gender, whatever our ethnicity, whatever our race, that all of us have been gifted with the capacity for reason, and that by the gift of using reason, we actually can come to some sort of common understanding about the way that the world looks. So, in the way that the world functions. So, for example, the meme that's here on the side, when the person says, 2,000 miles a day, I think I could drive that. No, actually, we can all recognize, because of the use of mathematics, if you drive 75 miles an hour and you never stop for a bathroom break or eating, you still cannot drive 2,000 miles in a day. It's going to take you longer than that. And by virtue of the gift of reason, we can arrive at a common picture that helps us to move progress forward as human beings. The picture that I have in my brain, and just someone who I want to lift up as a model for us in this first way that we're talking about truth, is Bartimaeus from Scripture. A story that, again, I'm sure you are familiar with. This is one of many people in Scripture that Jesus heals. But what's amazing about the story of Bartimaeus is that it's one of the very few stories in Scripture where we actually have his name. And the name Bartimaeus might give us a clue to the deeper meaning of this text. So at the surface level, Bartimaeus is a man who's blind. Jesus is walking by. He shouts out. Jesus says, "What can I do for you?" And he says, "I want to see." Now we can understand that he's looking for physical healing, that maybe physically he's blind, he's not able to see. Jesus is able to heal him. But the fact his name is Bartimaeus, this comes from two different words, bar, which in Hebrew means son of, and Timaeus. Timaeus, who's Timaeus? Timaeus is actually a Greek name. Why is this appearing? Timaeus is a character in Plato's dialogues. And he's a character who wants to understand the world and the way that the world functions. He wants to know all things. And he's a character in Plato's dialogue who uses sight as a metaphor for knowledge, of coming to know the world as it really is. So is this character in Scripture really son of Timaeus? When he says, "I want to see," is he really saying, I want to know the world as it is. I want to have an accurate picture of reality in my mind. And what this story is saying is that at a deeper level, not just physical sight, but that deeper level, that quest placed inside the seed of every human being to know reality, that Jesus is the one who can make that kind of knowledge possible. I can do this. I can help you to see at every level that that word seeing means. Now we're going to take a break here, and I'll just give you a clue of what's coming when we get after the break. We've talked about it as objective truth, and probably already in your head you're saying, but wait, it is more complicated than that. And so when we come back, what I want to talk about is, why is this thing that we're talking about of objective truth, coming to know reality, why is it actually way more complicated than that? But first, I think it's probably time, let's take a stand-up stretch break. We'll take, put 5 minutes, realistically we'll take 8. So why don't we say at 10 minutes before the hour, we'll pick up the conversation and we'll talk about why just talking about truth is objective doesn't get us everywhere that we need to go if we want to live truth. So I'll see you back again at 10 before the hour.
Great.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're pretty much all back. Got our blood flowing again. I said after the break, what I wanted to do is to complicate matters a little bit. So before the break, we were talking about objective truth. When we're talking about that classical definition of truth that Aquinas gives us, based again on Aristotle, what we're really talking about here is questions related to the existence of things, and the existence and the nature of things. So we're trying to find out what is and what is not. So for example, either the Earth is 4.6 billion years old or it is not. Either you were born in the state of California or you are not. In common parlance, for example, there's no way to be a little bit pregnant, right? Either you're pregnant or you're not. When we're talking about truth at that first level, what we're really talking about is what I think in common language, oftentimes we would say the facts. But the brain does more than just kind of collect facts. The brain also collates facts. It puts the facts, the different data that we have from the natural world, it puts it together in such a way that it begins to form sort of a picture of the world and how the world functions, but more than that, how to live in the world, what to do about the facts that we encounter in daily life. And so the brain begins to arrive at it puts things together in such a way that it begins to arrive at sentences like, let me try a few on for you. It's true that discrimination based on sexual orientation is wrong. Really, abortion is the most important issue in the coming election. The fact of the matter is that we should be wearing masks. Actually, the best thing that we could do right now is to go back to normal and just open up everything. The reality is that police unions need to be dissolved. Now, these are the statements, when I said about gravity, that probably doesn't get your heart pumping in the same direction. Like, these are statements that really would get your heart pumping and your blood moving, right? Are these facts? What's tricky about it is we're using the same language that we use in that category of truth that we just talked about before, where a lot of the language sounds identical, but we would recognize these are also truth claims that people make, but they're of a different nature than truth claims around quarks or around gravity. These ones we would say present a little bit more of a challenge to us, because even though we label these as facts, these aren't really statements about the existence of something or not. These are more statements around good or bad, should or shouldn't, whether this is better than that. And so these are what we might instead say, these are judgments or opinions or conclusions, whatever word you would choose there. These aren't facts, but they're at the level of judgment. Now, when I say that something is a judgment, or when I say that something is an opinion, it doesn't mean that it's not true. It just means that it's true or not in a different way. Let me say that one more time because that's confusing. When I say that something's an opinion, it doesn't mean that it's not true, but rather that it's true or not in a different way. So the conflation of fact and judgment is one of the things that makes our contemporary national situation so challenging. These conversations of talking about truth are so challenging. And I think that we make a helpful distinction, like we begin to move in the right direction of having these conversations better when we acknowledge that reality is objective, but the person who's trying to make sense of it and trying to figure out what to do in the middle of it is always a subject, a unique individual who has been shaped by their personal experiences, by their family of origin, the language they grew up speaking, the geography of where they live, their educational background, their religious tradition. We could go on and on and on in this regard. And so one way that sometimes helps me to think about how do we move from fact, what's going on in the brain that's moving us from fact to conclusion or opinion or judgment. A model that helps me to think about that is something called the ladder of inference. Aquinas didn't come up with this, but I think he would be well aligned with the thinking in this regard. That at the base level, it was created by two business school professors actually at MIT who were working with companies and trying to figure out, like, how do all these people who work in the same company, how do they all have such different judgments around what should happen? Like, we get together in a business meeting, we're all in the same room, and so quickly they're metaphorically in different corners. And what they observed, they were trying to track, like, what is the process the human brain moves through? That there's, at the base level, there's an immense amount of available data, or the facts that we've been talking about. Facts being like anything in the environment that we can smell, touch, see, hear, feel. But our brain can't hold all the data that we could absorb at any one point in time. It's like so massive, reality, like a bazillion volts of electricity, right? We select some of the data that we consider to be the most important data to pay attention to. It's not necessarily that this is happening in a malicious way, but it's just simply a function of the body that can't hold all data at the same time. So even right now, there is an immense amount of potential data that's coming into your system. You could be paying attention to the sound of my voice. You could be paying attention to the faint hum of the air conditioner unit. You could be paying attention to what's going on outside the window. But life experience has probably taught you the most important thing to be paying attention to right now is the sound of the voice of the person who's talking. And why did we figure that out? Because we were socialized from a very early age in the classrooms that we were in. There were listen to the teacher, or there's consequences to that. At a very simple level, one of my friends one time was doing an exercise on the ladder of inference, and he said, you know, you could be paying attention to this, you could be attention to this, you could be paying attention to the number of ceiling tiles. And this guy in the back of the room goes, 482. And he was horrified because he's like, what's the first thing that went through his head was, how boring must I be if he's counting ceiling tiles instead of listening to me? And so he said to the guy, he just kind of paused, he goes, how do you know that? And the guy goes, well, I used to be a ceiling tile salesman. He goes, I'm so embarrassed, I'm so sorry, but my wife gets on me all the time. I go into a room and I'm automatically counting, I could do this job, 5 boxes, $8,000, it could be done. Why is he paying attention to ceiling tiles? Because his own livelihood in some way, shape, or form depends on that information. So his brain sorts for that data. We're not paying attention to all data. We've been trained to pay attention to the data that is the most relevant data for our life and our survival and our thriving. But once we select the data, on top of that, our brain also adds reasoning and interpretation to the data that it has perceived in order to arrive at a conclusion. So again, let me give a real simple example of this first. Right now in St. Louis today, it has been a rainy, mucky day, but sometimes the sun has come out. And let's just say me and a colleague walk out of the classroom at the same time. One of us is just paying attention to the ground. Let's say I'm wearing heels. I don't want to step in a puddle. I don't even spot that there's a rainbow in the sky. So that's not the data that I've selected. But for my colleague who selected the rainbow in the sky, let's say this person's a science teacher. Maybe the thing that they see, the interpretation they give to the rainbow in the sky is, isn't that the most amazing refraction of light against water particles in the atmosphere? My other colleague on the other side of me is a theologian. But how do they interpret the exact same rainbow? It's a sign from God. Noah, ark. It's a sign, like we are in hands bigger than our own. Everything's going to be okay. And then the three of us are all talking with each other at the end of the day. And I'm the one who's never even seen the rainbow. I'm like, what a miserable day. And the other person's saying like, oh, it's all good. It's in hands bigger than our own. And you're like, what are we even talking about? Like, are you on the same planet that I live in? The human brain works its way up the ladder of inference in like 6 seconds. Let's use a more complicated example with this, though. Let's think about like the reopening of schools right now. There is an immense amount of data, right, that's surfacing right now. There's a lot of facts. We could be looking at facts from the medical field. We could be looking at facts from the financial field and the economic field. We could be looking at the facts that we know, like what we know about educational development and the role of face-to-face learning and all that kind of stuff, how children develop, what's the role of technology on children's brains. There's an immense amount of facts. Oftentimes where we disagree, now not always, but oftentimes where we disagree, we don't really disagree about the facts. What we disagree about is which facts matter, which facts should have more weight, which facts are the most relevant ones that we should be paying attention to right now. So where we disagree mostly is not at the level of fact. That we generally can sort out. Where we disagree about is which facts should we be paying attention to and what do the facts mean? Because oftentimes what ends up happening when we begin to talk about these kinds of things is we just end up talking at the top rung of the ladder. Now, when I say that, what I don't mean to say is that all judgments are equal, that there's no way of judging between these different opinions that people hold. I do think, and we treasure this in our school, oftentimes we'll say diversity is a tremendous gift in our schools. Like we really value working with people who hold different opinions and who see things differently than we do, because our brains are expanded by having people who have worked up the ladder of inference differently than we have. At the same time, we would want to acknowledge that doesn't mean that all judgments are equal. So within the Christian tradition, we don't believe in moral relativism any more than we believe in factual relativism. So factual relativism would be, if anybody believes it, it must be true, right? So if I say the world is not warming, that is of equal weight as saying that the world is warming. We don't hold that. We don't believe there's alternative facts. We also don't hold that all opinions are equal or all judgments are equal. Some opinions are better than other opinions. Some opinions are truer than other opinions. But we're going to need a different skill set to be able to figure out the truth of an opinion than we would the truth of a fact. Because racism is not something that you can take a ruler to. Whether we should have gambling or not is not something that a telescope is going to solve. So whereas logic and reasoning, those kinds of things are going to help us in that category of discerning fact, discerning truth around fact, we're going to need a different set of skills for discerning truth around judgment. So one of the things that we would say is the first skill that we need for truth around judgment is we first do need to be in contact with the facts. Do I have solid facts? Is there additional data that would be worth learning about? Because like, just for example, God forbid that I get diagnosed with cancer. And there's a multiplicity of different potential treatments. And my doctor and I are trying to make decisions around what's the very best thing for me to do based on my family circumstance, my economic situation. But whatever we decide to do, we want to make sure that the research that we're reading is based on solid fact. Because whatever decision we come to do about my treatment is going to be less true if we've been reading fake medical reports. But just coming in contact with the fact is not enough. I also, in order to make really good judgment or discernment, I need to ask, what are the filters on the facts that are active on my own ladder of inference? So what is the data that I'm selecting? Is there other data that's not even entering into my radar? Because each of us, we can't take in all the data, so we're filtering some of it out. And that means that I need to become aware of biases that I have, of ways that I privilege some sources of information rather than others. I need to become aware of how those filters impact the way that I reason and that I interpret stuff. So what we're talking about here is not just the development of reason, we're talking about the development of conscience. Because whereas the first way that we talked about truth is having a mind that's aligned with reality, what we're talking about here is having a mind that's aligned with the good. And part of that means being aware of the impact that my actions have on others and their capacity to live good, healthy, whole, free lives. One of my favorite lines that a mentor used to give to me all the time is, he said, "Anne, a difference that doesn't make a difference isn't much of a difference." So my husband and I, for example, we both like to drink LaCroix. I really like the lime. He really likes the lemon. I say more freedom to you. We can have a difference of opinion on this matter, and the world goes on and nobody is really impacted by it. But when we're talking about things like immigration, or we're talking about things like police reform, or we're talking about things like immunization, these are, when I hold an opinion, the opinions that I hold, the judgments that I've reached at, they impact not just me, they impact other people as well. And so I need to make sure that on my ladder of inference, I'm listening to the voices of those who are impacted by the judgments that I'm arriving at. So I need to ask these kinds of questions like, well, what news sources am I listening to? What are sources that I rarely ever encounter? Are there additional voices that it would be important and valuable for me to listen to inform my conscience? Am I listening for people who are Christian? Am I actually listening to what the church's wisdom has to say about this matter? Who's going to be affected by the judgments that I have? What I'm not saying is that truth somehow lies in a balance of a whole bunch of different points of view. When I say we should listen to a diversity of news sources, that does not mean that I think we should listen to fake news. So things that are factually untrue, they don't belong on the news. That should be eliminated in the first category. But in the second category, around my judgment, I do need to be listening to a diversity of different points of view there and perspective. I don't need to agree with all of them, but I want to know, are there ways in which I should be shaping my conscience in this regard, open to hearing how my actions are impacting other people and the effects of these different issues that we're talking about on their lives. Too often the conversations that we have with each other only happen at the very top rung of the ladder. We just trade our conclusions with each other. More fruitful conversation, the ones that we need to practice within our school system and help our students to be able to have, is we need to be able to talk at the lower rungs of the ladder. So if I go into the conversation with the idea of, let me just try to let you know why I'm right on this. If you had all the same data points that I had, if you had selected the same data that I've selected, if you were interpreting it in the exact same way I was, chances are you would already hold the same conclusion that I do. So just talking about who's right here is not a real fruitful way of going into the conversation. But if I can reframe the purpose of the conversation to think, why do we see this so differently? Is it that actually you have facts that I don't have? Like you've got data points I don't have. Is it that we've selected different data as the stuff that we're considering the most important and relevant to pay attention to here? And why is that? Or is it actually that we've got the same data, but we actually are just reasoning through it. We are understanding it, we're interpreting it in radically different ways. Let's talk about why. Those conversations oftentimes can sort of unstick the knot of truth conversations that we keep having over and over and over again in our country. So a model for me there that I like to lift up is the model of Jesus' encounter with the Syrophoenician woman. Remember Jesus in this story, it's another healing story. It's another place where Jesus says that faith saves, but in quite a different way. So in this scenario, Jesus, we know, he grew up in his own Jewish culture. This is where he was raised. Those were the scriptures that he listened to. And he discerned his call in life, his ministry in life, deeply rooted in his own prayer tradition and his own encounter with God. And what he had arrived at was a realization that he felt as if his ministry in life was particularly to serve what he called the lost sheep of Israel. His own nation was so scattered and so fragmented, and this is where I'm called to minister. But he takes a retreat out to Tyre and Sidon. He leaves his own land, his own culture. He goes outside, he meets a woman who's a Syrophoenician mother who's deeply concerned for her own daughter, her own child. And she comes to Jesus and she begs for healing for her daughter. And it's kind of harsh for us to hear, but Jesus basically dismisses her. Maybe he was joking, I don't know, but he calls her a dog, which is not considered a compliment in any part of that world. And the woman, she doesn't let it go. She comes back at him and he says basically like only, it's not right to feed the children's food to the dogs. And she says, hey, even the dogs get to eat the scraps from the table. Like, look, basically what she's saying to is your view, your vision of who you are and what it is that you're about is too narrow here. And you need to widen your view to see the choices that you've made. They're impacting me and they're impacting my daughter. And we would like to be in your frame of reference as well. We would like to also be included in your circle. And Jesus praises her very highly. And he says, I have not seen such, like this is faith, unlike any faith I've seen. Your faith is salvific. Your daughter, she can be healed. What is this faith? The faith of Bartimaeus was this deep desire, like, I want to be able to see, and the belief that Jesus could help him see. This faith is the belief that Jesus could change his mind on something that he had an opinion on when he actually received more information on that. It's a beautiful ladder of inference kind of exchange. So where have we been so far? We've talked about this command that we seek truth, but we've talked about it in two quite different ways. When we're talking about seeking truth, we're talking about seeking facts, seeking more knowledge of the natural world, seeking more knowledge of what exists. But we're also talking about the command to seek truth in our judgments, to be aligned with what's good. And that requires that we do some of these other things in addition to just seeking the facts, but that we also inform conscience when we ask about the impact of our actions on others. What I want to do is invite you in to break into your small groups again, be the same group that you were in before probably. Where do you see the conflation of fact and judgment taking place? And maybe especially within your schools, with your students, maybe you're not in a school system and maybe you want to talk more about, like working with faculty or working with peers, that's fine. What have you kind of found about being best practices in those conversations about what helps to clarify them? What helps to nuance them further and maybe move them forward so that they don't feel so stuck? But then maybe also, is there something that continues to come up where you just continue to feel real stuck that you'd like to bring back that you'd want to ask your group mates about, or you want to bring back to us as a whole? So these conversations are a little bit heavier than the earlier conversation we had. Why don't we take about 10 minutes for these conversations? And then we'll come back and have a little bit of processing about what happened in your small group together as a group. So Maka, do you want to send us into our rooms?
Here we go.
Mary Louise, are you having any challenges with the Zoom? It might be that she's just stepped away from her computer for a break or something too.
I think so, maybe.
Great. So maybe, let's see, it's 7:14. Yeah. Did you get to set the timer on that one?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm going to take a stand up and stretch break myself.
Go for it.
Back. I'm almost
Still
there.
in?
I'm still at. They're on a little break.
No break?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You getting bored down there yet?
Huh?
You getting bored
No,
down there?
well, I was reading it.
Oh, okay. Did let me put myself on here. My dad is eagerly waiting for me to be out of his room so that he can watch his TV show.
I was wondering what room you were in.
Welcome back, everybody.
Here it is. Okay, here we go.
Great. Great, great, great. I think everybody's in the process of evaporating.
It always just gets good and Zoom brings you back.
Sorry about that. I would, oh man, I would love to be a fly on the wall for these conversations too. I mean, these would be the ones I'd most love to listen to. I am curious though, maybe from the group, as people apparate back in, was there something that got said in your group that you're like, this was really a best practice that everybody in the whole room should know about? Or maybe something where you said, this was something we were all stuck on, like, how on earth do you deal with this? I would just say, feel free to unmute if you'd be willing to share.
I'm going to volunteer Lois to share her best practice.
Oh, excellent.
Well, I hope it's what you mean, but by asking me to do this. I was saying that, so Peter, Colleen, and Mary and I were in a little group. And so we know a former colleague of mine, we knew him. He has since died, actually, sadly. But and we were on a staff together, and he used to say in the staff meeting when we were like going back and forth, he'd say, You know what she's going to say now, right? And it was always, I would say, we need more information.
We
Like,
need more information.
anywhere until we get more information. And then I said that makes me think about it. Mary, is this what you want me to go to the next place with this? I said, I think sometimes we need to apply, the church needs to apply more of its own thinking or its own, what it has said to more issues in the world. So some of the things that we learned from the Second Vatican Council were to use all this, well, we thought it before, I know, but it was certainly stated clearly. Use every piece of knowledge available to humankind, right? Use the sciences, use the social sciences, use everything. So I said, so a couple of things that strike me where that would be helpful nowadays is to apply that idea to what the church officially still holds about LGBTQ folks and or women, because the science might tell us that the reality is something else that we've now become more aware of. We used to think the earth was flat. We don't think that anymore. Most people think it's pretty scientifically proven that there's something going on with the climate, however you want to use it, climate change or global warming, you can decide what to call it, but something's happening when the glaciers are melting. So I think learning through the sciences to then inform the other ologies, all ologies, maybe sociology, theology, psychology, have to come from probably first the natural sciences to some degree. And then that would help us move forward, I think, from some of these stumbling blocks that we have. And then I said, that's the place where I'm stuck. I'm stuck with like feeling kind of frustrated with that I feel like we have this great body of thought and process, and we don't use it to its best capacity.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
So I had a group of two. It was myself and Lene from St. John. So we're in the same area. We're both in Washington, D.C. And I apologize to Lene because I monopolized the conversation because I started it, and it's just something that I've been dealing with that I'm passionate about right now. And it's what's creating conflict in people that I work with is the whole issue of race. And so since the murder of George Floyd, it seems like everyone now wants to take on this, this issue of race, within the Lasallian world, ministries, our office. And so we've been having conversations. And of course, my reality, I work, well, actually, as of recently, there are 2 more Black people in the office. So now there are 3 of us, where when I was the only one for 15 years. But now, I mean, the views are just so different. And I have been frustrated because what I'm trying to get people to see, my white colleagues to see who are of leadership in the Lasallian world, that I do see that there's institutional racism within the Lasallian world, within our organization, when you look at leadership. And so I was talking to Lene, and I was saying, because she's at a school, I was like, so how is it that you help? Because she was saying that she's frustrated or she's challenged to help her students of color deal with this issue, everything that's going on. And I said, how does it work for a faculty and leadership that are mostly white to help the students of color deal with that? And why is it that it doesn't seem like that people can see that we need more people of color in leadership and as teachers at these schools, at our schools? And a lot of times Catholic schools, it's not just Lasallian, it's a lot of, within the whole Catholic world, most of it's white men and women now, but not people of color, not Black and brown people. However, the people that we serve, that we say we serve, the poor, are oftentimes people of color. So how is it that we're going to reach these people? And why do we not want to bring people that look like them into the picture? So, and I see this as truth. I think that everyone should see this. And I get really frustrated when it seems like people don't see it.
Is the ladder of inference helpful as a model to you at all? Like, is is it a potential tool for thinking about why different people see things in different ways?
Absolutely. So, so I was saying I have to start opening my mind to see that people do see things differently because of their perspective and all the different information. So I started thinking of a person, like what's going, all the information that they don't see. So I am going to start, thinking of this because the conversation can't end. It can't end. There has to be a conversation. So, I have to be able to see other views in order to continue the conversation.
And to help other people to widen their views.
Yeah.
Like help
So we all
clarify
have to do that.
why
We
we can't
all
see
have
all
to
the things.
look at
I'm
that.
sorry?
We all have to look at that ladder and see how we can do that.
Yeah. Michelle, thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
You
I
know,
think I'd like to interject that in our small group with Kathy and brother Joe Brienza, we touched on how we move so fast and we don't listen, or we're becoming conditioned not to listen, not to accept people's points of view or even consider them because of the fast pace of getting one's point across, which given the speed carries with it a shut up everyone, the voice that knows it speaks, and therefore those of you who don't agree is wrong. And how to slow down this freight train, because it's in our leadership. We were just touching on, if you looked at that car wreck called no one took a breath. So it's a problem that we see pervasive.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that it's kind of we're biased towards speed a little bit. Sounds like you guys are having great conversations. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut it off.
one of the things that struck me in our conversation, and Michelle, I'd like to, thank you for your sharing and to affirm your insights. One of the things that recently I found, and I think it resonates with, Anne, what you were sharing with the, I never can pronounce this, Syrophoenician woman, is that Jesus went beyond his border. Like he physically left sort of his territory, right? And went someplace different to encounter another voice, to encounter. Now, he wasn't necessarily purposefully doing that, but I think in that encounter, we saw his ability to crack open his mission, right? And to get a different perspective and a different understanding of his steps. And so I think placing ourselves in and listening to people that are beyond our personal borders is so important right now. Mm-hmm. This afternoon, I had a wonderful experience. I had been in touch with the young Lasallians from Lasallian youth group from Bishop Laughlin High School in Brooklyn. And because I know that they as a group, as young people, had been meeting to talk about racial injustice and their experiences and what they can do. And I basically, I asked, would it be possible for some of us to have a listening session with them? And they did the most magnificent preparation, and for young people, just in the summertime, to take their time to do this was remarkable and affirming. But for all of us involved, it was going beyond our natural, the orbits that we might naturally find ourselves in. So I think in these times, as we search for truth, it's just so important to look for those opportunities or create those opportunities to walk in a different place. So thank you.
Well, as you're speaking, there's a line, oh gosh, why is his name slipping my head? I can look this up, I could send it, but it's, It's a beautiful, he is a writer. He said, the experience of being listened to is so close to the experience of being loved that most people can't tell the difference. And it is that what is the primary way that we want to show love to each other is that listening is the most profound way that we do experience being loved. Yeah. So that's beautiful. You're in listening sessions. And then actually, I think I want to circle back in that direction again before we end today. So what we've talked about so far is really the command of faith to seek truth, both in our knowledge of the natural world and facts, but also in the judgments and the opinions that we form about how to best live together as a community in that world. There's another way, though, that came up in the conversations, and actually I think, Michelle, this goes back to what you were saying in the first definition you gave of truth with your sons, where you replaced it with the word of basically not compromising, like it kind of like an integrity. So when we talked about truth in that first way that came up, we were talking about truth as having a mind that's aligned with reality. And then we followed that up with also having a mind that's aligned with the good. Another way that oftentimes we talk about truth a lot in daily speech, and maybe also, brother, this had to do with the one about Trump. We also talk about truth as having a mouth aligned with your mind. Now, this is a little bit of a nuance to what we were talking about before. And Aquinas in the Summa actually does this nuance also. So he talks about truth veritas as having a mind aligned with reality, but then there's also truthfulness is having a mouth aligned with your mind. And he talks about that as veracitas. Now, the reason why I highlight there's a nuance here is because veritas and veracitas are not exactly the same thing. It is very possible that a person could be totally honest and speak their mind, but their mind is not connected to reality, right? And so that's what in Christian tradition we would call error. It's an honest error, right? Like, I'm very passionate, I'm telling you the truth, but what the picture I have of the reality is not aligned with what is actually in existence. So that's error. We would consider it as very unfortunate. But we also recognize there's such a thing as a lie. And a lie is like your mind is connected with reality, but what's coming out of your mouth is not actually what's in your head. And that, within our Catholic tradition, we would say is a sin. It's more than unfortunate, it's a sin. And the Catholic tradition, actually, if you look at like the catechism goes ballistic on this matter. Like there's very little, a lot of times within the catechism, things are pretty nuanced, but the statements about lying are incredibly strong. Lying is the most direct offense against the truth. To lie is to speak or to act against the truth in order to lead somebody into error. When you injure a man's relationship to the truth and his neighbor, a lie offends the fundamental relationship of man and his word to the Lord. That's a strong statement. Lying is not something that we're supposed to be neutral on. And you might wonder, why such the strength around this? The perception within our own tradition that underlies it is you cannot have a functional society if you cannot trust the other person to be honest with you. If you cannot trust that what's coming out of their mouth is aligned with what's in their own head. And you think about everything that and every community, everything that you depend on day in and day out we're trusting that we're telling each other what we actually know. So every time you drive over a bridge, you're trusting that the construction crew got the right information, like from the engineer, that they knew what a load-bearing pillar could hold and that they said the truth about it. Every time when you're buying food, you're trusting that the ingredients that are on that list are what each other actually said that they are. So all of society, think of the Tower of Babel story, all of society depends on our capacity to communicate honestly with one another. So what is required of us in this category? We're required not just to seek truth, but we're required to speak truthfully. Now, there's a lot of nuance that could go into this category when we begin to sink into it, because immediately you might begin to ask questions in your mind around like, well, is it ever okay to lie? Let's say that you're in Nazi Germany and a Nazi walks up to your door and says, are you hiding Jews in your attic? Are you required to tell them the truth? Or that's a big, huge one, but like even at a small or white lie is okay. If your significant other walks up to you and says, do I look great in this outfit? And you're not thinking that that's the best for their figure, do you have to tell them that, right? Or can you let that go? Is it okay to tell kids about Santa Claus? I mean, these are like the kinds of things that one could get their philosophers like to get their knickers in a knot about, going back and forth. It's kind of interesting when you look at and they're fascinating to talk with students about, if you ever want to bring this question up in your classroom. But it's fascinating to me that Aquinas, one of the ways that he wrestles with this is, this is in his section that he writes on the Summa on virtue. And so there's these big virtues, and then there's all these daughter virtues that are related to them. He puts truthfulness, under the category of justice. And you're like, what's the relationship between truthful and justice? Justice for Aquinas is giving each person their due. Truthfulness is giving each person the information that they're due. So not all people are owed all information, right? And I think sometimes, especially in a social media era, we may be really, really honest. We're saying a whole lot, but it's not necessarily information that other people are due, that other people need to have. But he's talking there about, like if I'm at the end of life and I am making and someone's making proxy decisions for me, that other person needs the information from my medical records in order to make a good decision. So it's truthfulness means giving each person the information that they are due. Is that a total answer to the question about how much are people due? And can I get more information from that? I mean, if I want to build a relationship with another person, can't just be like what they're due. It has to be, I can freely share information as well. But given that, I think it's a good starting point for the conversation. A lot of times what you'll see if you look online about guidance around being truthful and speaking truthfully, there's the 3 questions. I couldn't even track down where these 3 questions came from, but they're very popular and widely known. Sometimes they're attributed to the Buddha or a variety of different sources. But before I speak, I need to ask myself, is it true? And what I hear here is like, is it connected to the facts? Is it necessary? Is it kind? I think what Aquinas would do and Catholic tradition in general would do is tweak that just a little bit and say, is this grounded in reality? So is what I'm about to say grounded in reality? Like whatever I'm saying, it has to be real. Is it owed to the other person or is it helpful to them? And if it is, even if it's hard information that I have to share, how shall I say it charitably? And that one oftentimes seems to get lost, but that's part of being truthful, virtuously truthful, is that I also need to watch the tone in which I say it. I also need to watch, the care of word with which I say things. The model that I have for this one in my own thinking and from scripture is the story of the Roman centurion. Yet a third healing story, right? In which faith saves, but again, faith saves in a different way. So what is the story of the Roman centurion really about? The Roman centurion, very powerful person in Jesus's time. At the time when Jesus is alive in the land of Israel, Israel is basically a colony of the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire keeps it in check by force of the military. A centurion would be somebody who would be overseeing 100, if not up to 1,000 militia. But there's one in this guy's army that he can't fix the problem. He's ill, and he recognizes as much power and authority as he has, he can't heal this guy. And so he approaches Jesus, and Jesus, quite remarkably, he says, my servant is ill, and Jesus says, I'll go with you. But the most amazing thing is this guy says, you don't need to come with me, because he goes, I'm a person of authority. I know that when I say something, all I need to do is speak and it will happen because I have all the force of Rome, all the violence of Rome behind me. Jesus doesn't have any of that. And yet still the centurion recognizes, he says, Jesus, all you need to do is say the word and my servant will be healed, because your word carries authority. Now, why does Jesus's word carry authority? It's not like the authority of the soldier. Jesus's word carries authority because it has perfect integrity behind it. All the way through scripture, what you see over and over again, all the way through the Hebrew scriptures, is that whenever God speaks, it happens. So think of the story of creation. Let there be light, there was light. For God's speech and action are identical. And that's because there's no disingenuity in God, right? There's no lying in God. And so if God says something, it's the same as it happening. And so what the centurion recognizes is that Jesus has that kind of power, the power of internal integrity, so that Jesus too, he doesn't need to go. All he needs to do is to speak, and his word carries that kind of action to it. I love the story just for the model that it sets of what it looks like to live a life of real integrity. Before we finish though, and I know that we're getting closer to our time, we got to talk about one more way of doing truth though. And this one, I think, is the one that gets the most left out of our national discourse. Maybe it's the closest to what Marianne was saying in the beginning around spirit. I think it's the one which Father de La Salle would say to us, your whole thing about truth, Anne, is incomplete unless you talk about this one. And this goes back to the very first thing that we talked about with that Hebrew word emet. So in Hebrew, the word emet that we said means truth. It appears 127 times in the Hebrew scriptures. Fascinating that it shows up so often. And what scholars of the language say is that there's something of the meaning of the word in Hebrew is captured just in the way that it's written. So the word emet in Hebrew is comprised of 3 Hebrew letters. Aleph, which is the first word in the Hebrew alphabet, Mem, which is the dead middle of the Hebrew alphabet, and Tav, which is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And what the scholars of the language say, this says something about how our ancestors in faith thought about the word truth. Truth is straightforward and comprehensive. It goes from the beginning to the end. It holds the whole of reality, and it moves in one direction. Notice when you look at the word truth, each of the letters, they rest on the line on which they're written in twice. So sometimes it's said that truth has 2 feet that it stands on. In contrast, the Hebrew word for lie is sheker, which also has 3 letters, but these letters are all from the end of the Hebrew alphabet, and they're jumbled up. And notice that each of these letters only touches the line on which they're written just one time. Each letter in sheker just has 1 foot. What they would say is that this tells us something about sheker, lying, means it's easily jumbled up and a good strong wind blows it over. It all falls over. Whereas emet, truth is sturdy. It's stable. It stands the test of time. You can lean on emet, and emet will hold you up. And so this is so the word emet, it means a lot the same thing as what it means in everyday English language. But it has these nuances to it that are kind of missing out of English. That when you look at your Bible, depending on the translation of your Bible, some versions of the Bible translation will say in Psalm 119, the sum of your word is truth. And another translation of the exact same line will say, permanence is your word's chief trait. That sounds different to us, doesn't it? But for our ancestors in faith, there's this connection between truth and permanence, fidelity. Now we have some of this left still in English in our in marriage vows, right? So I promise to be true to you. If you asked me right now, is Mike true? I've been married to Mike now for 26 years. My guess is that you're not talking about the classical Greek definition of the term that Aristotle or Aquinas were using. You're not asking, does Mike exist? Like, that's not really a question in my mind anymore. I take that part for granted because we eat breakfast across the table most mornings. But what I hear you asking is Mike true? Is Mike faithful, right? This is a different way of using the word true. And this oftentimes gets lost in wider discourses about truth in our society. It's not lost on Pope Francis. The model from scripture that he really illuminates, and this is from his talk that he gave for the Chrism Mass in 2018. It was a beautiful talk on the parable of the Good Samaritan. Now, this parable, I know that you know, but there's a man probably coming from Jerusalem, injured by robbers, beat up, left on the side of the road. And the next two characters who pass by are people probably of his own nation, probably the guy who's coming back from doing pilgrimage in Jerusalem. Who passes by is a Levite and a priest. And what it says is both of them, when they kind of spot what's happened over here, what happens is they go to the opposite side of the road. And it's like they get a distance. And sometimes when you talk about truth, you'd say, oh, getting a distance is a good way to get truth. Like, it gives you the broader picture. But the Good Samaritan does truth in a radically different way. What the Good Samaritan does is he sees someone's on the side of the road and he draws nearer to the situation. And sometimes I think there's so many situations in the world where I'm just like, I'm not sure what the right answer is. I'm not sure what to do here. And sometimes the right answer, if I draw near, I'll have a better insight into what the right action would be to take. And that's what Francis lifts up in his own preaching from this Mass. He says we need to realize even more that closeness is a key to truth. Can distances be shortened where truth is concerned? Yes, they can, because truth is not only the definition of situations and things from a certain distance, discovered by abstract and logical reasoning. It's more than that. Truth is also fidelity. And I think what we're coming maybe right now, I do hear this emerging out of the conversations that have happened this summer. And I hear emerging, like Lois, I think, to refer back to what you talked about with LGBTQ issues. Why is our national consciousness about this changing so rapidly in the last, say, 10 years versus in the last 200? I think it's this, as more people have identified their own sexual orientation, and we realize, these are my dear friends, these are my dear family members, the closer I get to the situation, the more I realize, oh, something's going to need to change here. Like, my opinion that what I hold about this is going to require adaptation. I do suspect sometimes the deep, deep struggles our nation faces and that we face around racial consciousness issues is like, have we actually had relationships? If I'm closer and I can see how much this hurts, do I begin to change some of the theories or opinions that I hold from a distance? I think that's what Francis is calling us to here. And I do think this is what's so rooted in the Lasallian charism. Definitely for De La Salle, it was this question of how do I help these men who maybe ordinarily wouldn't have all ended up being friends with each other, how do they live in community? He kept calling them to a nearness to their brother, to understand more, like the union, the relationship that we have with each other matters tremendously in this regard. And so this is what are we called to in this zone? Beyond seeking truth and speaking truthfully, we also have to figure out how to, if we really want to live truth, we have to figure out how to be true to each other, which requires skills, a whole new set of skills that we're going to have to figure out ways of overcoming unconscious bias. We're going to have to figure out ways of overcoming our fears of difference, our fears of being in relationship with people who we see as radically other than us. We're going to need to figure out skills for remaining in relationship, even when we don't agree on stuff. I think Eboo Patel has done amazing work here in the realm of interreligious dialogue. Maybe an interreligious dialogue between Jews and Christians and Buddhists, like, we're not going to come to the same page on some of these religious truths. We can keep having the conversation. We're not moving anywhere. Maybe we need to figure out ways of, even if we can't agree on the same truths, arrive at ways of being true to each other, maybe by common service, maybe by praying for each other. Like it may not mean that in our moment in time, we're going to be able to arrive at a common picture of the world in our heads. Can we still in some way, shape, or form be true to each other? That also though requires creating healthy boundaries, because sometimes there's things in which I'm just like, on this side of heaven, I'm not going to be able to be in this relationship. It's been so hurtful. So sometimes I need to know when to call a relationship off, but I need to figure out ways also of figuring out, and when do I stay here, even though this is an uncomfortable place to be. So whenever we're helping our students and our faculty and ourselves cultivate capacities for friendship, we at that very moment are also, in the broadest sense, cultivating capacity also for living truth. So I will share this with you afterwards if you want to. I can send this out as a chart to the group. But if I hear Jesus saying, those who live truth come to the light, what I hear is really a challenge in 3 different zones: seeking truth, speaking truthfully, and being true to each other. Now, there's a way in which, I just want to close on this note. The temptation, I think, is just to pick one of those 3. Like, we all know people who excel at one of these zones or the other. But this, I want to draw back again on that word emet that I was just talking about. I find one of the things that's fascinating about emet, that my Jewish friends have pointed out to me, is that emet is only 1 letter away from the word met in Hebrew, which is the word death. And to me, that strikes me, I know, that you can't take away any of the letters of this word, because we all know people who are passionate about seeking truth, but they're incredibly uncharitable. Like they don't have a capacity to be in relationship with other people. We also know people who are incredibly honest, but are not actually connected with reality, right? And so if we take just 1 letter away from this word emet, I do think we end up with the word death. A lot of times what you're going to see being asked in the wider society right now, I see it on the news, like, well, what does it mean how shall we navigate living in a post-truth society? And whenever I hear that, I think of this line from the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, where the guy in the book says, I think it might be a word from Zen, mu. Mu means unask the question. You're asking the wrong question. When I say, what does it mean? Like, how do we navigate a post-truth society? You're asking the wrong question. There is no such thing as a post-truth society. There's either truth or there's not a society. Because we take 1 letter away from the word truth, there's not going to be a society. We have either the question, we as a people can figure out how to live truth, or we can figure out how to die. But there's no such thing as a world in which there is not truth. And I know for myself, the reason why I'm so convicted about this, when I wanted to research it and write it and talk about it, was because I would much rather live truth. I'd rather see the world go on than to die. And so I would just say, if we could bind together in this semester that's coming up in any way, shape, or form, to commit to trying to help our society to have conversations around truth. The book that I've been speaking out of is the book that's on the screen right now called Let's Talk About Truth. I talked to Ave Maria Press about anybody who's a part of this conversation. If you enter in, you can get 25% discount if you enter in the code Truth Talk anytime during this semester if you want to buy the book. If the area of interest that we've been talking about that's most interesting to you is that second zone around how do I negotiate conversation with people who just have radically different judgments and opinions than I do, that's what Redeeming Conflict, my earlier book, is a little bit more about. There's a free study guide that goes with that one if you wanted to use it with faculty. There's one person I know who's been using it with high school students at a Lasallian school, actually out in California. The Truth book, I just finished drawing up a set of 10 lesson plans for how can we teach students about truth this semester. And I'm going to send those to Marianne. that anybody who's come to this session, we can give those to you for free. They're meant really for like high school level, but I think they could be adapted easily for college or for middle school as well. So I want to be your partner in helping you guys to educate around truth. So thank you so much for being here this evening. And I look forward to continued conversation with you guys on this topic. Marianne, let me turn things back over to you.
Sure, and thank you so much. On behalf of all of us gathered here, it has been a rich evening, a rich conversation, good time in community with one another, and certainly you have given us much to think about. But I think also clarity and hope. And so if we have a minute, I would just like to open it up to my colleagues. We have about 2 or 3 minutes. If any concluding comments that you would like to share with one another while we have each other on this screen together. Now, I know all of you on the screen, and I have never found any of you at a loss for words. So I'm going to take it as we are just absorbing all that we have experienced. So thank you again, Anne, and we look forward to continued collaboration with you on this. So thank you very much. Peace, everybody. Stay in touch.
Thank you.
Best
Okay.
wishes.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Thank you. Do you think the bishop should make a public statement on truth? Oh, that's interesting.
Oh, I
Brother
didn't see that.
Joe, he's still on. Brother Joe is still on. Do you think the bishop should make a public statement on truth?
I think what's kind of funny is the Catholic Church has very strong statements about that. It'd be nice if they were reiterated. I'm waiting to hear a homily on lying. I mean, I don't understand why that topic has not regularly come up, and like why that's not regularly being preached, that we actually believe that lying is wrong, and that the problem, like just like what's happening in the newspaper, like lying, this is not okay. I would love to hear the bishop say something about that. I'm not entirely sure why that hasn't happened, but yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. It was really nice seeing you. God bless in Mexico.
Muchas gracias. Buenas noches.
Gracias.